Guia de estilo e instruções para a síntese de fala. Este é o início da mensagem. Comece com energia total e um tom de comando, capturando a atenção imediatamente. Today, we're going to walk through 12 of the most haunting places in Texas, locations where history refuses to stay buried and where witnesses still say the past steps into the present. Stay with us until the end, and if this kind of eerie exploration sparks your curiosity, hit subscribe and give us a like so we can keep bringing more places like these to light. Number 1. Yorktown Memorial Hospital, Yorktown, TX. Built in the early 20th century to serve a tight-knit community, the hospital closed decades ago, but never quite emptied. Its long corridors once smelled of disinfectant and warm bread from the nearby diner. Now they hold the hush of dust and plaster. The legend says a child who died in the stairwell never left. Staff and explorers report tiny wet footprints leading from the second floor to the nurses' station, then stopping at the doorway. I felt something brush my ankle like a little hand, one night guard told a local reporter. Cold drafts gather in rooms where no windows are open. The place's history of quiet grief and sudden loss is what many believe keeps it awake. Number 2. Baker Hotel, Mineral Wells, TX. Once a glamorous resort where wealthy Texans came for the healing waters, the Baker fell into disrepair and rumor. Its ornate lobby, marble staircases, and sunlit porches hide stories of fortunes won and lives faded. People who sneak inside swear the ballroom still whispers with soft music and the shuffle of dancers long gone. Orbs caught on cameras drift along the ceilings. You can hear someone humming, like someone practicing a tune from the 20s, a trespasser said. There are tales of a woman in a white dress who appears on the staircase at dusk, always looking toward the sunlit hills. The hotel is memory-made architecture. Its glamour haunts the shadows. Number 3. The Driskill, Austin, TX. A grand stone gilding in the heart of the city, the Driskill has hosted politicians, cattle barons, and travelers for more than a century. Its marble and woodwork still hold the faint scent of cigar smoke and roses. Guests talk about a gentleman who wanders the hallways, returning to a room he once occupied in life, and a young bride who collapsed and died on the grand staircase. Her presence felt by brides who later stayed in the hotel suites. The elevator stopped between floors, and a cold whisper said, "I'm sorry," a front desk employee recalled. History and hospitality overlap here. Some say the hotel keeps its own keepers. Number 4. The Emily Morgan Hotel, San Antonio, TX. Perched opposite the Alamo, the Emily Morgan's Gothic facade casts long shadows over cobblestones. Built on the bones of a hospital, the building's connection to suffering and care lingers in the rooms that once held the sick. Legend tells of a nurse who still walks the halls at night, checking on patients who are no longer there. Guests report phantom footsteps outside their doors and faint cries from empty corridors. Guia de estilo e instruções para a síntese de fala. Você é um narrador palestrante, com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era "Air doors and faint cries from empty corridors." Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. This, Number 5. Hotel Galvez, Galveston, DX. Faced toward the sea, the Galvez has weathered hurricanes and history with equal stubbornness. Its ballrooms once held masked revelers and ship captains. Its windows look out over tides that have taken more than cargo. People staying late on balconies talk about a father who searches for his lost child among the dunes, a presence that watches the shoreline and turns away at sunrise. The balcony radiator clicked, and a tiny voice said, "Daddy," a housekeeper reported quietly. In Galveston, the sea keeps its own ledger. The hotel is where those ledgers whisper back. Number 6. USS Lexington Museum, Corpus Christi, DX. The carrier that became a museum holds both metal and memory. Crew quarters, narrow passageways, and the hum of machinery still echo with stories of discipline and sudden danger. Visitors and staff tell of a sailor who never left his bunk, a figure seen standing by the bunks at night, or a shadow slipping through the mess hall. We'd get static on the radio that matched no channel, like someone else trying to speak, a docent said. Whether the ship remembers battle stations or quiet twilight, its steel bones seem to keep fragments of those who passed through. Number 7. The Alamo, San Antonio, DX. One of Texas's most fabled landmarks, the Alamo is both shrine and battleground. It carries the weight of a violent, decisive moment in history. The ground is a place of sacrifice that many say echoes still. Witnesses speak of figures moving in the chapel at odd hours, soldiers replaying commands, a drummer boy without a drum. After the crowd left, I stayed to take notes and felt like someone was leaning over my shoulder, watching, a historian recalled. The response here is reverent and unsure. People feel the past press against the thin veil of now. Number 8. Presidio La Bahia, Goliad Historic Site, Goliad DX. The fields and stone walls carry a quiet, terrible memory. The execution of prisoners in 1836, a massacre that left a scar on the land and the people. At the historic site, educators lead tours that do not shy away from the facts. The legend and the grief are tightly braided. Visitors report hearing distant commands, the shuffle of marching feet, and a sense of being witnessed by soldiers long dead. We were standing by the wall when a cold, steady wind blew across us, and the hairs on my arm rose, said a teacher who takes students each year. Here, the haunting is not sensational. It's a communal remembrancing. History pushing up through the soil, asking not to be forgotten. Number 9. Marfa Lights, near Marfa, DX. Out in the high desert, on clear nights, travelers gather along the dark stretch of road where mysterious lights have been seen bobbing and gliding above the horizon. Some call them phenomena of atmosphere and geology. Others tell tales of ghosts looking for loved ones, or lanterns of lost travelers. Drivers stop, cameras out, and the lights sometimes answer. A slow float, a quick dart. They'd shine and then blink like someone trying to get our attention, a pair of campers said. The lights refuse to be pinned down, alternating between natural spectacle and uncanny presence. They are a desert chorus that never quite resolves. Number 10. Fort Phantom Hill, near Abilene, TX. Ruined walls and a lonely landscape make this little fort a perfect place for stories. Constructed in a rugged time, the fort was meant to be a sentinel and became, in time, a ghost of itself. Hikers say they hear the creak of leather and the snap of branches as if a patrol still circles the perimeter. Strangers on the trail report a figure at the edge of the ruins that vanishes when approached. The wind moved the same way a uniformed man would walk, an exploration group leader said. Fort Phantom Hill keeps the taste of wind and iron. Its silence is full of steps just out of reach. Number 11, Excelsior House Hotel, Jefferson, TX. In the river town of Jefferson, this hotel has hosted steamboat passengers and river merchants since the 19th century. The dining room still holds candlelight shadows in the evening, and rooms keep the hush of river nights. Guests talk about a woman seen in the doorway of the attic room, a possible bride whose story faded with the river. Waitstaff hear soft silverware clinking in the dining room long after the last guest has left. When I cleaned room 12, a faint scent of lavender lingered, like someone had just passed, a maid once said. The town's slow, watery history seems to settle into the hotel's beams, and some of it refuses to leave. Number 12, Bastrop County Old Jail, Bastrop, TX. The brick building sits near the courthouse, its cells small and close. Once the center of law and punishment, it now houses stories people tell in low voices. The courthouse lawn carries politics, and the jail carries consequence. Inmates passed through, and those days are not entirely quiet. Visitors report handprints on cold bars, low murmurs behind locked doors, and a shadow that pauses in the doorway of the cell block. I stepped into one cell, and the temperature dropped so fast my breath showed, a local historian said. The jail's narrow corridors are a kind of memory tunnel, where voices from confinement press against the present with questions and regrets. Through these 12 places, a pattern runs clear. Buildings and landscapes meant to shelter, to serve, to defend, or to celebrate, do not always stay only in the past. They keep a residue, an echo, a draft, a scent that people encounter when they cross a threshold. Guia de estilo e instruções para a síntese de fala. Você é um narrador palestrante com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era "At people encounter when they cross a threshold." Você está no meio de uma frase ou pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal, sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. Sometimes these are fragments of grief. Sometimes they are the residue of joy. Sometimes they are simple human longing for recognition. We're not here to claim causes. We're here to listen and report what witnesses say. Footsteps where none should be. A perfume with no wearer. Lights moving like lanterns held by absent hands. If you feel the pull to visit any of these places, go gently. Respect the history and the people who live there now. Many of these sites are cared for by communities who protect both the memory and the architecture. If you're drawn, support that work. Follow rules, take a guided tour, and leave nothing behind but your question. If this journey through Texas's restless corners gave you a chill or sparked the question, let us know in the comments which place you dare to visit. If we entertained or spooked you, like the video, subscribe for more explorations, and share your own encounters. Maybe we'll tell more stories like these together. Even without easy answers, the stories keep arriving like mail from invisible neighbors. Short, plain, urgent. A man who works nights at a highway rest stop near Marfa told us he learned to leave the last cup on the counter when someone visited the bench outside. "It's polite," he said. "You don't take it away. You don't startle whoever's sitting there." He did not claim to have seen anything out of the ordinary. Only that once, in the thin hour before dawn, the cup was gone, and a faint, clean smell of coffee lingered in the air. "Like somebody had finally finished a story," he added. That sense of gestures unfinished, of visitors paused mid-motion, runs through the reports. In Jefferson, the river seems to hold on to the shape of people. The sway of a dress, a single slipper, the echo of laughter in a room long after the gas lamps are out. At Fort Phantom Hill, the wind learns how to march in step with soldiers who no longer walk. At the Bastrop Jail, the building keeps the memory of confinement the way a hand keeps the warmth of a held object. People come to these places for different reasons. Some are drawn by curiosity, the bright itch of a thrill. Others arrive with a steadier hunger. Those who are grieving, who think of someone they lost and come hoping the world will tilt in favor of a sign. Then there are the caretakers, volunteers and historians who spend afternoons sanding wood, cataloging artifacts, answering questions from school groups. To them, the odd occurrences are less about spectacle and more about obligation. A woman who helps run tours at the Excelsior House told us she treats the attic room the way older families treat heirlooms, with care and with a little suspicion. "You don't pry, you show respect," she said. Sometimes the house moves around and tells you what it remembers. You listen. Listening, it seems, is the key practice. When witnesses describe an impression, an ache of nostalgia, a flash of light, the smell of lavender, what they often mean is that the place made room for them. The phenomenon is less a theatrical haunt and more an invitation to stand at a threshold and notice. In these thin places, the boundary between past and present is not erased. It is porous. You will not always find an explanation that fits a neat model of science or superstition. Sometimes the best account is a list of sensory facts. A drop in temperature, the creak that comes just behind your shoulder, a small object that appears where no one left it. There are, of course, dangers that come with wanting to know. Trespassers risk running afoul of property owners or damaging fragile structures. Curiosity can tip into recklessness, scrambling over crumbling brick, crossing wet banks at night, or mistaking a fragile artifact for a souvenir. This is not just about law, it is about stewardship. One volunteer at Bastrop warned us that a single careless visit can erase a story that has waited 100 years. If you pull a nail, you change the way the house tells its history, she said. Preservation is not only physical, it is ethical. Treat the buildings and the landscape as you would a person whose patience is already thin. For those who navigate these places responsibly, the encounter is rarely cinematic. It is more likely to be a small, quiet thing. A temperature change that makes the hair on your arm stand up. A soft footstep that aligns with your own. A float of scent that carries a name, even if you cannot place the face. People leave written notes in guest books. Sometimes prayers, sometimes thanks, sometimes questions. In rural communities, the elders keep oral lists of what they have heard. These lists are not proof in the scientific sense, but they are cumulative. They are a human archive. At the edges of these archives is the question that nags. Why do some places hold so tightly to their past? There is no single answer. Structures tend to preserve narratives the way sponges keep scent. They absorb impressions from their occupants, the accidents and rituals of daily life. Fires, births, farewells, fights. These events are the industry of memory. Some theories point to geology. Certain soils, mineral emissions, or air currents could create optical effects or induce physiological sensations. Others emphasize psychology. Places that are quiet, weathered, and layered with history prime the mind to find pattern in ambiguity. And then there is the simplest hypothesis of all, that we, as a species, are storytellers who refuse to let good stories die. Whatever the cause, the effect is the same. The places we visited keep asking us to slow down and listen, to pay attention to the ordinary things that make a life: footsteps, dishes, tending a horse, locking a door. They remind us that history is not only contained in plaques and archives, it resides wherever people lived, argued, loved, and left. In that way, visiting a haunted house or a lonely fort becomes a kind of apprenticeship in humility. You go not to conquer the mystery, but to witness what remains when a life has been interrupted. Some visitors come away disappointed, some exhilarated, some merely calmed by the sudden feel of being small in a much longer story. All of them carry an encounter back into daily life, an image, a phrase, a scent that surfaces in a moment of stress months later. That is perhaps the truest haunt, not an apparition, but the way a place reconfigures the map of your memory and insists that you look differently at your own margins. We left the last site at dawn, driving back through low, gray light, where the land opens like a book that has been left ajar. Along the way, we passed a farmhouse whose porch lights still burned, and a small group of deer stepping across a field. For a while, the car was filled with the small, ordinary noises of a morning: radio static, the rustle of maps, the low hum of tires on pavement. Then one of us, without looking up, said, "It's like these places are asking us to come home." No one argued. If you travel to any of these locations, bring a willingness to be quiet, a readiness to be respectful, and a flashlight that stays in your hand only when the place asks for it. Keep to marked trails and posted hours. Speak to caretakers before you ask to go behind a rope. If you write down what you experience, consider who the story belongs to. Sometimes it belongs to a living community that still remembers how a room used to be full. Leave the space such that the next person can still enter it and find its quiet. We will keep going. There are more sights, more stories, and more small signs waiting in the dusk. For now, the road remains an open question. Not a line drawn between then and now, but a bridge whose planks creak with someone else's footsteps. We listen as long as we are welcome, and walk away when the house asks us to. The next site rose from the map like a soft promise: a one-room schoolhouse set back from the road, half hidden by lichen-streaked oaks and a fence that had long ago loosened its pride. We turned down the lane because someone, an elder in a diner, a woman at a historical society meeting, had said the name in a way that folded into itself, as if the syllables were part of the building's architecture. The building's paint had surrendered to the sun. The bell no longer rang, but the iron bracket that had once held it still cast a thin, polite shadow at dawn. The caretaker there was not a uniformed professional, but a man named Ellis, who kept the keys in a coffee can nailed to the fence post. He moved with the economy of someone who sees himself as a temporary steward rather than an owner. "School closed in '56, he said, wiping his palms on his jeans. "We keep it simple." Kids come for the festival. The rest of the year it waits. His eyes went, for a moment, to the door, as if the building had been expected to answer. Inside, the air held the smell of dry paper and cold wood, the particular bouquet of things kept away from the wind. Desks lined up like small pews. One of them still bore a child's carved heart at the underside of the lid. The teacher's desk faced away from us, as if it were still waiting for someone to enter and place chalk in the holder. On the blackboard, a faint rectangle suggested erasures, traveling lessons that had been written and rubbed away so often the slate itself had a memory of hands. We walked the aisles slowly. It seems almost too earnest to say that the room tilted our imaginations toward the tiny lives that had passed through it. First letters learned badly, secrets exchanged under benches, the heat of small bodies in winter. But there were traces that belonged less to metaphor and more to history. A shoebox of attendance registers with names in looping 1940s script. A scrap of ribbon pinned to a nail. A slate tablet whose chalk still held the shadow of a multiplication table. Ellis watched us handle nothing we were not expressly allowed to touch. "There are family members who still come," he said. "They bring pictures and sit on the porch. We let them leave what they want, but there's a limit." His voice suggested that the limit was both ethical and practical. The building could only hold so much of the past before it began to be pressed flat under the weight of its own collected meaning. On the teacher's desk, under a square of glass, lay a small, folded piece of paper. It was a note, the edges browned, ink blurred where rain had at one point attempted to make the handwriting legible to the world again. Someone, perhaps a pupil, perhaps a parent, had written 3 lines and then folded it carefully. Ellis did not encourage us to open it. He did not forbid it either. His restraint was part policy, part reverence. We read the note aloud, not to each other so much as to the room. It said, in a child's crooked hand, that the writer would come back to the school when they were old, to bring their grandchildren, and to show them where they had learned to write their name. The last sentence was simple and oddly devastating. "Tell them I wasn't afraid." That sentence hung in the air like a small bell. The thing that makes visiting these places uncomfortable is not always the presence of sorrowful or dramatic events. Sometimes it is the ordinary courage that accumulates there. The steady, stubborn ways that people live through ordinary difficulties and mark them with small acts of defiance. A clean window, a mended curtain, a name carved into a corner for no one to notice. The child's assertion of fear, or lack of it, felt like an unfinished conversation with the future. We debated, quietly, whether to copy the note, to photograph it, to transcribe the handwriting for later scholarship. The question was less about preservation than about ownership. Who exactly had the right to carry this child's sentence into a book or a talk or a website? The lineage that produced the note included a family whose descendants still came to the porch. It included Ellis. It included the room itself. And it included, tenuously, the strangers who had come to listen. In the end, we left the paper where it lay. We took a photograph, not of the words, but of the light falling across the desk, an image that said something about the room without plucking a private sentence out of its context. Ellis nodded, not relieved so much as satisfied by the minimalism of our response. "Some things are for us while we're here," he said. "Other things belong to the ones who raised them." Later, beneath oaks whose leaves whispered like old pages, someone asked how we would tell the school's story. Would we frame it around architecture and dates? Around enrollment numbers and restoration grants? Would we make a small exhibit? Or would we attempt a longer, more forensic narrative? Interviews, genealogies, timelines? The answers bent back to the question we had been carrying for days. What are we asking these places to give, and at what cost? The route took us next along a river road where the light sat low and bronze on the water. We passed a grist mill whose wheel, now motionless, had once been the spine of a community's economy. The mill had been adapted into an interpretive site. A plaque spoke in straightforward sentences about industry and flood, about workforce and decline. The volunteer guide there, a woman with hands stained from years of mending quilts, told us about a flood that had come 50 years prior, and carried away not only the miller's boat, but a ledger that had recorded names of workers, their hours, the grain they brought. She spoke with the pragmatic sadness of someone who knows that loss can be both literal and archival. People ask to see the ledger, she said, leaning on the railing where a gull had found a perch, but some ledgers list men who never got a fair bargain, and some pages tell what people had to do to survive. Putting all of it out is complicated. She pointed to the river, where, with a tilt of her chin, she seemed to include in the gesture the whole labor of living by water. Crossings, drownings, marriages, the way the tide reshaped livelihoods. At dusk, the landscape folded into itself, and the wind came with a low voice. We found a roadside church with a cemetery that sloped toward the field, headstones leaning as if gossiping about the crops. There was a bench beneath a yew, where an old woman sat and hummed hymns to herself, not loud enough to be heard across the stones, but present enough to stitch the plot together. She recognized us, outsiders, in the way that a place can recognize the pattern of a shoe tread, and invited, in a manner that was both hospitable and guarded, for us to sit. We talked about the ethics of narrating loss.